All right, everyone. So we're going to start with a full-blown example of how we can create a reminder list application. And the reason I'm making this video is so that you can get familiarized with essentially all the different moving parts that are involved in creating a full application from the front end to the back end. Okay, so we're going to have a server running Express. We're going to be using EJS pages, and hopefully you're going to see how all these parts connect with each other. Now, I'll give a quick warning that this video is going to be a bit long, and the reason is because I'm not going to skip any steps here, and I'm going to try and go through the entire process with you. Now, we're not going to be using a database. We're going to sort of fake our own database for the purposes of this video. And what you're looking at right now in front of you is essentially what the final result is going to be. Okay, so I'm just showing you first of all what the final result of what we're going to build looks like. And so you can see here we have our main page, which basically is supposed to show us a list of reminders. You can see currently that there are no reminders, so I can go over here and click create. When I do this, I can go ahead and type some reminders. I've already tested this out before. So I can go and click this and say my reminder. Okay, it doesn't matter what you type. Okay, so it can be my first reminder, my first to do, whatever, my reminder title. And in the description, I'll put some description. So this is a reminder description. Okay, and now when I click submit, you're going to see that we have our first reminder added. You can see the title, the description, and whether or not we've completed this reminder. Okay. Now, of course, the way in which you design your reminders may look completely different from this. Okay. So you may not have something like the word completed. Instead, you might have something like a date. And so instead, this might say date, and this will perhaps, instead of saying false, show you the date for when that reminder is going to be due. Okay, so the fields that you see in here are obviously going to depend on your way of structuring a reminder, but this is simply just an example that I'm trying to show. Okay, I can create another one over here, and so over here I can say something like buy groceries, and then in the description I can give it a description, so go purchase some bananas, and I can click submit. Okay, so this is the first page where we can see reminders, and this page over here was the page where we could create a reminder. Pay attention to these URLs over here. You'll notice that the URLs are changing depending on the page that we're on. So on the main page here, this is just a page where we can see all our reminders. So this is our reminder page. If I click create, this changes to reminder/new. Okay, so we're going to go back over here. There's another thing you can do. You can go and click view and see an individual reminder. If I click view, now I can see information about this specific reminder only. Notice that the URL says reminder/1. What do you think would happen if I change this to reminder/2? If I press enter, you'll see that it changed to the second reminder. And that would be the same thing as me going over here, clicking view, and then when I click it, it goes to reminder/2. So over here, I can choose to edit the reminder if I want to, and if I click edit, I can change some of the stuff. So instead of bananas, maybe I'll say go buy, strawberries. And I can also change the completed field to be true. When I click submit, you can see that the information has changed. Go purchase strawberries, completed true. You can see here that the data has changed. Finally, I can go to view and I can delete this particular reminder. If I click delete, you can see now that on our main page of reminders, it's been deleted. I can go ahead here, I can delete this one as well, and we're back to where we started. Okay, so let's take a look at how I built this so you can sort of see how all the pieces fit together. I've got an empty folder here called reminder. Okay, so it's a completely empty folder. I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it into VS Code. So I'm going to take it, I'll drag it onto VS Code. Okay, and we're going to start from scratch. So the first thing we're going to want to do, I can press Control-tilde over here. I've got access in VS Code to my terminal. So the first thing is we can go ahead and create a package.json. Now remember that for this application, we're going to need to use certain things like Express, which is the program we use to create a web server in Node.js. And so remember, the first thing you must always do when you start a new project is you have to type npm init. This is going to create that essential file that you need called package.json, and that file is going to be used for us to get access to things like Express and different Node modules that we'll install. Okay, so I'm going to press npm init. It's going to ask me some questions. I'm just going to keep pressing enter, 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 one more time. Okay, and so you can see here it's created this file called package.json. And the idea is that inside of this file, we need to say all of the different third-party dependencies, the different pieces of code other people have written that we are going to use in our application. This file needs to specify what those packages of code are. Okay, so what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to download my first package. And my first package of code, this module is called Express. So I'm going to say npm install Express, and I'm going to press enter. You'll see that this was added automatically to our package.json. It's a line of code that says our application needs Express in order to run. And you can see that Express has been installed for us right over here. Okay, so we've got Express. Now there's a few other things I'm going to install, which we're going to need. Another thing we're going to need is EJS. So I'm going to do npm install EJS, and I'm going to press enter. Wait for that to install. So there's a few more things that I want to install. The first one that you've probably never seen, npm install Express EJS layouts. So this one you've probably never seen me use, and I'm going to go over in this video what this module is going to do for us. Okay, so I'm going to install this one. And the last one that I want to install, it's very, very useful, npm install nodemon. So nodemon is short for node monitor. Nodemon is a special module we can install, and what it's going to do for us is it's automatically going to refresh our server whenever we make changes. So you'll remember that we had to keep closing our server and then restarting it whenever we made changes. Nodemon is simply going to refresh it automatically for us, so we don't have to worry whenever we make changes to our code about restarting our server. So I'm going to install this. Perfect. Now, in order to use Nodemon and have it automatically refresh our code for us, in this script section over here, I'm going to change test and I'm going to say start. And then inside here, I'm going to go and change this to say nodemon and save this. Okay, so now what this means is when I type the following command, npm start, this code over here is going to get run. And as I told you, nodemon is a special program that's going to refresh our server for us. Okay, so you're going to type npm start, not node start. You're going to type npm start. Okay. Okay. So with that setup out of the way, the next thing we should do logically is probably create a main file where we're going to have our server code, right? So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to type index.js. Okay. And let's start by creating a very, very basic Express server. Okay, so you'll remember that with Express, we can have a basic server or we can have an advanced server. Now, we are going to be focusing on creating an advanced server in this application. And so these are the following parts that we're going to need. The first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to pull in Express. So this line of code here is going to import for us Express. The next line we're going to type is Express and execute it like it's a function. When we call Express like it's a function, Express is going to return back to us a web server that we can use. And so this server that's going to be given back to us, I'm going to store in a variable here called advanced server. Now this is a little bit long to type every single time, advanced server, so I'm going to shorten it to just app. But keep in mind that even though I'm calling it app, really what this is this is actually our web server. Okay, this is the server that Express has given us back. Now, although we have a server, we need to actually have it listening on some URL port. So in this case, I'm going to say 8080. Okay, and so what this means is that when our server turns on, in order to access our server, we need to go to the following URL, localhost 8080. Okay, and so by going and typing this URL into our browser, we will be able to access our server. Okay, so take a moment to just internalize everything that we've just talked about. So far our application is still fairly empty. And so at this point now, this is where you want to ask yourselves, okay, where should we go next, right? There's this feeling of what is the next thing that we should do? Well, what you could do is you could start off by making a basic server, right? Because Express can be a basic server. So we could start off by doing what we did in a previous video where we said app.use express.static, and then remember that inside here we're going to pass in dir name plus /public. So remember, this code is going to tell Express to look for a folder called public, which I'll create right now, and inside that folder, whenever the browser is requesting some file, go look in this public folder to see if that file exists. So let's just run our server for a moment and see what happens, okay? I'm going to go and type node index.js. We have an error, and our error is, it seems I already have something listening on port 8080, so I'm just going to make this port 8081. I might have another server currently running in my computer. So I'm going to do this, node index.js, okay? And what I'm going to do now is go in my browser to localhost 8081. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I press enter? I press enter, and it says, cannot get /. Remember, / refers to our index.html page, our main, most basic page. And it's saying it cannot get it. And if you think about that, that makes sense, right? It makes sense because we don't have any file to give back to the browser. So I can go into this public folder and create a file called index.html. And inside of here, I can go and say something like this. Hello world. And now I'll refresh my browser and you can see it saying hello world over here. Now this is fine, but first of all, I want to show you that we're not actually using NodeMon. We're not using NodeMon, and so our server is not automatically getting refreshed, okay? And so what that means is that if I make a change, like over here, if I make this 8083 and I save, so this is just some code that I changed on our server, right? I just changed some server code. If I go ahead here and change this to 8083 and press enter, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because we made some changes to our server code, but we never restarted our server. So normally at this point, what I have to do is I have to type Control-C. This will kill our server. Then I have to go again and type node index.js. I pressed enter. Our server has restarted. Now I can go to localhost 8083. So doing this every single time you change some code on the server is going to get very tiring. And so what we can do is we can install, well, we've already installed NodeMon, so we can make use of this NodeMon module that we set up earlier. So if I go here and I type npm start, you can see that by typing npm start, something called NodeMon has started. Okay, and so what's going to happen is NodeMon is going to listen anytime we make changes to our server code. Let's take an example here. I'm going to change this from 8083 to 8081. As soon as I save this file, I'm going to save it right now. Notice what happened. NodeMon said, oh, you made some changes to your server, I'm going to restart. Because you've made some changes, I'll automatically restart for you. It automatically restarts our server, and now I can go ahead here and go to 8081. Okay, and everything is working. Great. Okay, so we have a basic server running. We can serve index.html and whatever else we want from this public folder. But as you and I already know, this application is going to be a very dynamic application. It's going to require more than just being able to send basic static files to a user. And so because of this, what we're going to do is we're going to convert this basic server into an advanced server. What is required to do that? Well, remember, we're going to be using EJS. And because we're going to be using EJS to give us dynamic HTML pages, we need to go and bring EJS into here. We need to configure our Express server and tell Express, hey Express, we want to use EJS. Okay, so the way we can do that is we type app.set, and inside here we pass in view engine, and we set it to EJS. Okay, so that's the first thing. But there's another thing you might recall I installed. I installed something called EJS layouts. EJS layouts is something I'm about to show you. And so we want to configure Express to also allow for EJS layouts. Okay, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to say app.use EJS layouts. Now, obviously, Express currently has no idea what this variable EJS layouts is. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say const EJS layouts equals require. And inside here, I'm going to pass express dash EJS dash layouts. Okay. Okay, great. So slowly, you can see that what we're doing is we're building up our server. We're configuring our server with more and more options. And this is very realistic with real life, because when you work at a company is probably already going to have a server like this set up with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of different kinds of libraries and modules that they are using. And so at one point in time, that company's code probably looked not so different from this. They probably only had a few different libraries and things they were using, but over time, their code grew larger and larger. And so you can see how we're slowly adding complexity to our code line by line. Okay? So the next thing I want to do is remember that I said we're using EJS. So because we're using EJS, there's a special folder we need, and that folder is a views folder. Okay? This views folder is mandatory, and it's important that you call it views. Okay? Now, what exactly are we going to put inside this views folder? Well, there's three things I want to put inside. The first thing I want to put inside is another folder, which I'm going to call partials. Okay? The first thing is another folder called partials. The next thing I want to put in this views folder is another folder, which I'm going to call reminder. And finally, I'm going to add a file to this views folder, and this file is going to be called layout.ejs. Okay? So let's start with layout.ejs, because obviously layout.ejs is the new one that you've probably never seen before. So I'm going to copy in a little bit of code that I've written ahead of time for this. So what exactly does this code look like over here? Well, a lot of it is going to look very familiar to you, right? This code over here is just regular HTML. We are using a library here called Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is a library that will give us some really easy ways to add CSS styles to our buttons and make our site look a little bit nicer. We're not going to get into Bootstrap right now, but the point is that most of this looks like pretty normal HTML. We have a reference here to style.css, which we haven't created right now, so we can of course go into our public folder if we want, and we can create a file called style.css, and we can add our own styles into here if we want to. We've got some script tags at the bottom that are pointing to some Bootstrap stuff that we don't have to worry about right now, but I can go ahead, of course, if I want to, and type script source equals maybe, app.js or whatever you want to call it. And then I can go into my public folder here and create a file called app.js, which I can put my JavaScript code into, my browser JavaScript code. Okay, so most of this is the standard HTML that you will see on any page that you visit. What's interesting is this code inside here. Okay, so this code inside here is code that is basically going to get inserted inside of this HTML. Okay, so this is the way it's going to work. First, you'll see that this line here says include a partial called navbar. You'll probably remember the concept of a partial. So a partial is basically a small chunk of code, a small chunk of HTML code that we write in another file. And the nice thing is we can take that code then and import it into here. And so all of this process of putting things in separate files and importing them, this is going to make our code more manageable over time. Because over time, if you start having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, being able to use partials that have specific chunks of HTML, like just a navbar or just the footer of your page, is going to make it much easier for other people to understand your code. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our partials folder. You'll remember that we have a folder here called partials, and we're going to create a file inside of it called navbar.ejs. The reason we're making this navbar.ejs is because we're saying here that we want to import a file called navbar.ejs right into our HTML over here. So navbar.ejs, I'm going to put the following code in. So this is just regular HTML. This is just HTML for a navigation bar, okay? And you can see that inside our HTML, we have two list items. One of them says list all, another says create, and these have links that are pointing to different pages, okay? So what we're going to do is all of this HTML over here is going to get imported into this part right over here. So instead of us having to do this, you can see how our page is starting to get a little bit crazy, right? Because we have all this HTML code, and eventually if a new person comes onto your team and they look at all this HTML, they're probably going to get overwhelmed and say, wow, this is crazy, this is so much code. And so by putting it in a separate file like this, it becomes easier to rationalize exactly what's going on. Okay, and so the next thing is this area here called body. Now this is why we needed to install this EJS layouts module. You'll remember we did npm install express EJS layouts. So the reason we did this is specifically because of this function over here. When you type body as you do, just like this, what this means is that any page that we create over here in this reminders page over here, so any page that we create is gonna get placed into this spot right over here, okay? And so again, this is just us taking other files, other pages, and importing them right inside here. And the reason that this importing is nice is because normally you would have to take all of this code over here, and you would have to take all of this code over here, and you would have to copy and paste it inside every single EJS page that you create. And so instead of having to copy and paste all of this code over and over, we can simply say, use all of this HTML here and here as a basic skeleton for our web application. What that means is that every single page in our web application is going to have, no matter what, all of this code and all of this code wrapped around it. And this part in the center, this is where we are going to put our unique HTML. Our specific HTML for each page is going to get imported inside here. But because this code never changes, this is a skeleton that's going to wrap around all of our code. Okay? So now, obviously, what you probably can guess is inside our reminders directory, we need to actually go ahead and create some files. Okay, so now the question becomes, what exactly do we want to put in here? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a few files right now. I'm going to create an index.ejs, and let's just start with that for now. Okay, so we're going to have an index.ejs, and inside of here, I'm going to put a bunch of code. Now, don't worry about this. This probably looks a little bit crazy right now, but I'm going to come back to this in a moment. Okay, so remember where the source of all of our code is. Whenever anyone visits our application, localhost 8081, the first file which is always going to get run is our main index.js. Our main index.js is the file that contains all of the essential routing, all of the configuration for our server. Everything lives in this file. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to say is the case number one, case one. Case one is a user goes to essentially localhost 8081. Now, we could just say that when a user goes to localhost 8081, then we should show them, show a list of reminders, right? But if you think about it, we might not necessarily want to do this, right? And the reason we might not want to do this is because think about something like Facebook, right? When you go to facebook.com, right? Remember, localhost 8081 is the same as localhost 8081 /, same as facebook.com /. So when we go to facebook.com, you're not suddenly going to see, all of your, news feed and your friends and status updates and all these things. You're not immediately going to see that. Because usually what happens is when you go to facebook.com, presumably you're not logged in. You might not even have an account, right? You might not have even signed up yet. And so because of that, when you go to the main page, usually that main page is going to show you some information about the site, maybe tell you, why don't you sign up or why don't you log in? That's usually what that main page is going to be for. And then once you log in, after that, maybe you'll get sent to something like facebook.com /Cindy/newsfeed. And at this point, now you can see all of the specific stuff about your Facebook. Okay, so let's try and do something similar here. Let's forget about this main page right now. Maybe this main page is going to be some sort of welcome page where we show some pictures that kind of show some marketing about our application and what it's all about. And there's going to be a button that says log in and sign up. We're going to forget about all of that right now. And so we're going to go and move on to our second case. So case 2 is user goes to localhost 8081 /reminder. And so in this case, we can assume the user has already logged in or they already have an account, and we want to show a list of the user's reminders. Okay, so this page over here is going to be our home page /marketing page. Okay, and this page over here /reminder is going to show a list of all of the reminders. So let's go ahead here and type that in, app.get, and now in here I'm going to say /reminder. And what we're going to do is we're going to say inside here, when the user goes to /reminder, I want you to run the following code. Request response. Over here, I can say something like response.send. Here are your reminders. Okay, so remember that anytime in Express, when you go to some page, like when you tell Express that if a browser is asking for /reminder, run this code, run this function. This is where we have the opportunity to choose what kind of logic we want to execute. Once we're done executing any logic, we can finally say response.send and pass in the stuff we want to send back as a response. Now, of course, what do I mean by logic? Well, maybe logic is something like this, var logic equals 4 plus 4, equals, and then I can say over here, something like 4 plus 4. I don't know, something like this. Okay, so this is going to say 4 plus 4 equals, and then whatever the result of this is. Okay, 4 plus 4, which is 8. Now I can take this variable called logic, and I can say here are your reminders plus logic. This is a very random example, but my point is that you can do some logic. Maybe it's talking to a database, whatever it is, and finally you can send a response back to the browser. Okay, so let's take a look at this for a moment. I'm going to go here and I'm going to refresh the page. Now, interestingly, when I refresh the page, it says hello world. Why does it say that? Right, okay, so this is a good question. Why is it saying hello world when we haven't done this over here? Remember that we never did this. When you go to the index page, do blah blah, right? We don't have that, but still, we're able to see hello world. The reason is because we still have this code in here uncommented, okay? So we still have this line of code. And this line of code is going to tell our server to look in our public folder for an index.html. So by default, if we have this code in here, then what's going to happen is this index.html with hello world is going to get sent back to the browser. Now, I can delete this index.html because, as you know, we're creating an advanced server using EJS, meaning we don't need this. Now, if I refresh the browser, we get what we expect, right? Which is, cannot get /. And so if I go here, I copy this, I'll put a paste in here, I'll say something like, when the user tries to go to / in the browser, which is just our main page, then what I want you to do is I want you to send the following message, and I'll say, welcome to our landing page. Marketing content goes here. Okay, and so if I refresh this, it says welcome to our landing page, marketing content goes here. Okay, so maybe the marketing team is going to design this page for us, this main page. And once the marketing team has designed it, then we can put that content inside here. All right, so /reminder, let's go to that. /reminder, press enter. Here are your reminders. 4 plus 4 equals 8. Great. So we can see that things are working. Obviously, however, we don't want to send something silly like this. What we actually want to do is we want to now get a list of reminders for a user and send it back. Now, there's one small optimization that I want us to make here. Over time, you're going to be having tons and tons of these kinds of things. You're going to have all of these different app.get, and inside of them, you're going to have your functions. Now, the problem is that these functions might start to get really large. There might be tons and tons of logic that you're putting into these functions. And so one small optimization we can make is we can extract these functions into their own file. What that means is that we can export these functions into a separate file, and then we can import that file into here, and call that function from a separate file. That's going to make our code much cleaner and easier to read. And one of the main things about this course is us trying to create projects that are manageable, right? Trying to make manageable code that other people can understand. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually delete this here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate file, which is going to be called reminder controller. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, but the point is that inside reminder controller, which is going to be a separate file, that is where we are going to have our functions. Okay, so .func, whatever the function is. So first of all, we need to create this file. So over here, I'm going to make a folder and I'm going to call it controllers. The reason I'm calling it controllers is because this file is going to contain all of our sort of controlling logic that'll determine what's happening in the application, right? So it's going to control all the logic for maybe talking to a database, getting the user's reminders back. All of that stuff is going to be in this folder here called controllers. And so inside controllers, I'm going to make a file and I'm going to call it reminder_controller.js. Okay, so remember that when you create a file in Node.js, you need to export it, and then you also need to import it into the file that you want to import it into. So this file over here, let's just temporarily put, I don't know, some dummy content into here. So I can go here and I can say something like module.exports equals reminders controller. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just make this an object for now. I want to remind you again that whenever we talk about objects in JavaScript, an object is simply a dictionary. It's the same thing, okay? So just like a Python dictionary, that is what an object is. So I'm going to say reminders controller equals, and we have our object here. Okay, so that's great. For now, I'm just going to let it be an empty object, and I want to take this object and I want to import it into here. Okay, so this reminders controller, I'm going to import it into our index.js. The way I'm going to do that is over here, I'm going to say const, and then I'll say reminder controller equals require. Remember, require means import. And inside here, I'm going to say go to the controllers folder, and inside the controllers folder, import reminder controller. Okay, and just with that, we are able to have our reminder controller imported. Okay, now something that you need to keep in mind is we're going to be getting an error, and the reason we're getting an error is because we're saying over here, when the user goes to /reminder, what I want you to do is I want you to call this function, which is inside this file. Now, obviously, reminder controller does not have any function in it called func. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an actual thing. Let's call this list. Reminder controller.list. And so now, inside this dictionary, I'm going to create a key called list, and the value is going to be our function. And finally, inside this function here, this is where I can do whatever logic I want to do. So I have request, I have response. For a moment, let's just test this out. So I'm going to say response.send, and I'll say hello from another file. Okay, let's take a look at our console. Seems like things are okay. And so how are we going to access this? Well, /reminder is going to call into the function in this file. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to refresh, and it says hello from another file. So just to recap what we did, instead of doing this style here of putting functions directly in our index file, we extracted this function out of this file and we put that function inside a reminder controller file over here. And so what we did is we gave a name. The name of the function is called list. This is the logic of the function. And this list function is inside this reminders controller container over here. So this dictionary, reminders controller, we are exporting this dictionary. This dictionary has one function, here is the function, and here is the name of that function. We take that dictionary, we import it on line 4. Okay, so we import it, we call it reminder controller, and now we can access that function by saying reminder controller.list, which will call this function over here. And finally, this function is sending back to the browser, hello from another file. Okay, so hopefully that has made sense so far. We're gonna take a short break, just go have a walk, drink some coffee, whatever. And when we get back, we're gonna start taking this up another level by rendering actual EJS files instead of silly text like this over here. All right.